In 1970, one of America's most powerful aerospace corporations made a decision that would cost them millions. North American Rockwell, the company that built the Apollo spacecraft and the B-1 bomber, looked at Cessna's dominance in general aviation and said, "We can do better." They weren't wrong to try. By the mid-1970s, Cessna had manufactured over 100,000 single-engine airplanes. They were producing more than 5,000 aircraft annually. The Skyhawk alone was on its way to becoming the most produced aircraft in history. The market was absolutely massive. So Rockwell assembled their best engineers, conducted elaborate market research, even invited aviation journalists to review their preliminary designs. They would build the ultimate four-seat airplane, one that prioritized comfort, modern styling, and military-grade strength. The result was the Commander 112. And on paper, it looked like a Cessna killer. But here's what Rockwell never saw coming. A prototype would crash during testing. Structural problems would plague the fleet for decades, and despite all their aerospace expertise, they would eventually abandon general aviation entirely, selling off everything they built. This is the story of how a giant stumbled into a market it fundamentally misunderstood. North American Rockwell wasn't just any company trying to break into general aviation. This was the aerospace giant that built the engines powering Apollo astronauts to the moon. The corporation behind the legendary P-51 Mustang, the B-25 Mitchell bomber, the supersonic B-1 Lancer. Their Sabreliner business jets were already flying executives across continents. So when Rockwell looked at the general aviation market in the late 1960s, they saw something that simply didn't make sense. Cessna, Piper, and Beechcraft were building thousands of simple four-seat airplanes every year. The market was absolutely exploding, and none of these established players had access to Rockwell's military-grade engineering expertise. Here's what Rockwell believed. They could apply aerospace precision to general aviation and simply outclass the competition, build something better, stronger, more sophisticated than anything from Wichita. But this wasn't their first attempt. Throughout the 1960s, Rockwell had stumbled repeatedly trying to enter this market. The Lark, the Darter, a failed revival of the Myers 200. Each attempt crashed and burned before gaining any real traction. This time would be different. Rockwell assembled their best engineers and launched the most comprehensive market research program the industry had ever seen. They surveyed pilots, studied buyer preferences, even invited aviation journalists to review preliminary designs and offer suggestions. They weren't guessing about what pilots wanted. They were engineering success from the ground up. The plan was ambitious. 2 versions of an entirely new airplane. The Commander 111 with fixed landing gear for budget-conscious buyers. The Commander 112 with retractable gear for those wanting performance. Rockwell would capture both market segments simultaneously. On December 4th, 1970, the prototype 112 lifted off for the first time. The airplane looked absolutely stunning on the ramp. Sleek lines, thoroughly modern styling, a cabin wider than anything competitors offered, 47 inches across compared to the Piper Arrow's cramped 41. This was the future of personal aviation. Then disaster struck. During flight testing, the prototype's tail structure failed catastrophically. The airplane crashed. Rockwell's engineers scrambled to completely redesign the entire tail unit. Certification was delayed by over a year. The Commander 111 program was quietly abandoned. only 2 prototypes ever built. By late 1972, Rockwell finally delivered their first production 112s. The base price was $24,750, roughly matching Cessna's Cardinal RG. They had survived the setback. The marketing team emphasized one message above all others. This airplane was built with Herculean strength. That claim would become the cruelest irony in general aviation history. The Commander 112 looked like a winner. Customers stepping onto the ramp saw an airplane that absolutely dominated visually. Modern styling, rakish lines, a cabin so spacious it rivaled twin-engine aircraft. The trailing link landing gear made even mediocre pilots look good on touchdown. Then they flew it. The brutal reality hit within minutes of takeoff. The Commander 112 cruised at roughly 130 knots. Think about that for a moment. A fixed-gear Piper Archer with 20 less horsepower could essentially keep pace. The Beech Sierra, an airplane renowned for its leisurely cross-country speeds, was actually faster. How was this possible? Rockwell had built their airplane like a military transport. That robust construction, that Herculean strength they marketed so aggressively. It came at a devastating cost. The airframe was simply too heavy for its 200-horsepower engine. All that military-grade engineering translated directly into disappointing performance. Rockwell scrambled to fix the problem. In 1974, they released the 112A with increased gross weight. The improvement was marginal at best. The 112TC arrived in 1976 with a turbocharged engine, finally reaching 160 knots at altitude. But pilots had to climb for 20 minutes to see those numbers. The real solution came that same year with the Commander 114. A 6-cylinder, 260-horsepower Lycoming finally gave the airframe adequate power. The airplane Rockwell should have built from the beginning was now available, 4 years late and significantly more expensive. By 1979, a fully equipped 114A Gran Turismo cost nearly $100,000. That was $20,000 more than Piper's competing Turbo Arrow, for an airplane that still couldn't match a Mooney's speed. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Remember that Herculean strength Rockwell promised? By the mid-1980s, structural problems began surfacing across the fleet. Wing spars were cracking from gear retraction stress. Tail attachments were failing. Seats were breaking loose during flight. The FAA responded with a cascade of airworthiness directives. A D77-16-09 mandated seat reinforcement. A D87-14-03 addressed the cracking wing spars. A D88-05-06 required tail repairs, costing $2,500 per aircraft. The irony was complete and absolutely crushing. An airplane built to military specifications, marketed relentlessly for its superior strength, was now grounding pilots for structural failures. Every claim Rockwell's marketing department had made was collapsing under the weight of mechanical reality. Rockwell had seen enough. By 1980, they made the decision that would define this entire saga. They were getting out of general aviation entirely. In February 1981, Rockwell International sold the entire Commander division to Gulfstream Aerospace. After nearly a decade of losses, engineering setbacks, and mounting warranty claims, the aerospace giant simply walked away. Their experiment in general aviation was over. Gulfstream had zero interest in single-engine piston airplanes. They wanted the turboprop twin commanders to complement their business jet lineup. The 112 and 114, orphaned immediately. Not a single new commander, rolled off any production line under Gulfstream ownership. But Rockwell's timing couldn't have been worse for the industry they abandoned. General aviation was about to experience a catastrophic collapse. In 1978, American manufacturers produced 17,811 aircraft. By 1994, that number had plummeted to just 928, a staggering 94% decline. Product liability lawsuits were strangling the industry. Claims and defense costs exploded from $24 million in 1976 to over $210 million by 1986. Cessna, the undisputed king of general aviation, halted all-piston aircraft production in 1986. Piper declared bankruptcy in 1991. The entire industry was bleeding out. Meanwhile, commander owners faced a different nightmare. Those structural problems kept multiplying. Wing spars cracking, tail attachments failing. The very airplanes they'd purchased for their legendary strength were falling apart. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Commander owners refused to accept their fate quietly. They formed the Commander Flying Association and did something remarkable. They took on both Rockwell and Gulfstream simultaneously. For nearly 3 years, this small group of aircraft owners applied relentless legal pressure against two corporate giants. The manufacturers initially resisted. These were billion-dollar corporations facing a few hundred frustrated pilots. The owners won. In spring 1989, Gulfstream and Rockwell agreed to a $12 million settlement covering repairs for all 990 affected aircraft. Owners paid $2,000 each. The manufacturers absorbed roughly $10,000 per airplane in parts, labor, and transportation. The Commander line attempted resurrection in 1988 when Randall Green's Commander Aircraft Company acquired the rights. They produced an improved 114B starting in 1992. For a decade, new Commanders trickled off the line, approximately 200 aircraft, before bankruptcy struck again in 2002. Since then, the type certificate has changed hands repeatedly. Chinese investors acquired the assets in 2014, promising renewed production. Nothing materialized. Today, roughly 1,400 Commander singles remain flying. Total production across all variants and all eras reached just 1,490 units. The Cessna 172 has surpassed 45,000. The Rockwell Commander story reveals an uncomfortable truth about disrupting established markets. Aerospace expertise doesn't automatically translate to general aviation success. Military-grade engineering doesn't guarantee civilian appeal. And the biggest cabin in the category means nothing if the airplane can't keep pace with its competitors. Rockwell entered general aviation with every advantage imaginable. Deep pockets, engineering talent, sophisticated market research. They even had a head start. The new FAR Part 23 certification standards gave them a clean slate that established competitors lacked. None of it mattered. The Commander 112 was too heavy, too slow, and ultimately too expensive for what it delivered. When structural problems emerged in an airplane marketed for its strength, the irony was complete. Rockwell didn't just lose to Cessna, they lost to the fundamental realities of general aviation economics. Meanwhile, the Cessna 172 keeps flying. Over 45,000 built and still in production 7 decades later. No elaborate market research, no military-grade construction, just an honest, reliable airplane that does exactly what pilots need. Sometimes, the company that understands its customers beats the company that over-engineers for them. Subscribe now, because the next story of corporate ambition meeting aviation reality is already waiting.